5 people, 5 different lives, one shared nightmare. What you're about to hear will connect them all through a door that should never have been opened. Each story builds to a truth so terrifying, it will change how you see every shadow in your home. Do not look away. Do not skip ahead. The pattern must be complete, or you'll never understand why they're still screaming from the other side. And whatever you do, don't search for the cabin, because once you know its location, it knows yours. The journal. David pressed his phone against his ear, watching the signal bars disappear one by one. The rental cabin squatted before him like a wounded animal, its weathered logs dark with decades of mountain rain. Pine trees pressed close on all sides, their branches forming a canopy so thick that midday felt like dusk. "Great," he muttered, shoving the phone into his jacket pocket. His editor had promised him 2 weeks of complete isolation to finish his novel. No internet, no distractions, just him, his laptop, and the crushing weight of a deadline that had already passed. The key was exactly where the rental company said it would be, under the third loose board on the porch. David's fingers came away dusty and cold. The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the surrounding forest. Inside, the cabin was smaller than the photos had suggested. A main room with a stone fireplace dominated the space. A narrow ladder led to a loft bedroom. The kitchen was little more than a corner with outdated appliances and a sink that dripped with metronomic persistence. But it was the smell that made David pause, not the expected mustiness of a place long closed up. Something else, something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. He dropped his duffel bag and walked to the far wall, where he noticed something odd. The wood paneling didn't quite line up. There was a section that seemed newer, the stain slightly different. He ran his fingers along the edge and felt the telltale outline of a door that had been sealed over. David spent the first hour settling in, trying to shake the feeling that the cabin was watching him. Every creak of the settling wood made him look up from his laptop. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should be, even with all the lights on. It was while searching for extra blankets in the bedroom closet that he found the journal. It was wedged behind a loose board at the back of the closet, wrapped in oilcloth that felt greasy under his fingers. The leather cover was unmarked, except for water stains that looked almost like handprints. David brought it downstairs and set it on the kitchen table under the brightest light he could find. The first entry was dated 15 years ago, written in careful handwriting that grew increasingly erratic as the pages progressed. Day 1. Finally found the perfect place to write. Remote enough that Sarah can't track me down with her demands about alimony. The silence here is absolute. Day 3. Something wrong with the door in the main room. Keeps making noise at night. Sounds like scratching. Property manager says it's just mice, but I sealed that door myself last month. Nothing should be getting through. Day 7. The scratching is constant now, coming from inside the wall. I can hear it even during the day. Sarah called. I didn't answer. The sound stops when the phone rings, like whatever's in there is listening. Day 12. Found symbols carved into the wood behind the sealed door. They weren't there before. I'm sure they weren't there before. The scratching has stopped, but now there's whispering. I can't make out the words, but I know they're about me. David's coffee had gone cold in his hands. He flipped through more pages, the handwriting becoming increasingly frantic. Day 18. It knows my name. The voice behind the door knows my name. It sounds like Sarah, but wrong. Hollow. She's been dead for 3 months. I got the call from her sister. Sarah is dead, so why is she whispering my name from inside the wall? Day 23. I opened it. God help me. I opened the door. The darkness inside isn't empty. It's full of them. Everyone who's ever been connected to this place. They're all in there, and they're all looking at me with eyes that aren't eyes anymore. Day 25. I understand now. The door doesn't lead to another room. It leads to the space between spaces where the lost ones wait. Sarah isn't dead. None of them are dead. They're just elsewhere. And now I can join them. Final entry. If you find this journal, burn it. Burn the cabin. Whatever you do, don't open the door. It's hungry, and once it tastes you, it will never let you go. I can see the symbols spreading. They're on my hands now. They're inside my skin. The whispers are getting low. The entry ended mid-sentence, the pen dragged across the page as if the writer had been pulled away while writing. David set the journal down with shaking hands. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. He looked at the sealed door across the room and noticed something that made his blood turn to ice. Fresh scratches marked the wood around the sealed edges, deep gouges that definitely hadn't been there when he arrived. That night, David lay in the loft bedroom, laptop closed beside him. He'd managed exactly 3 sentences of his novel before giving up. Every sound the old cabin made seemed amplified in the darkness. The wind in the pines sounded like whispering voices. The settling wood groaned like the cabin itself was in pain. At 3:17 a.m., the scratching started. It came from directly below him, from the sealed door in the main room. Slow, deliberate scrapes against wood, like fingernails dragging across a coffin lid. David held his breath, counting the seconds between each scratch. There was a pattern to it. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. Morse code. SOS. Someone was trapped behind that door, calling for help. David crept down the ladder, each step carefully placed to minimize the creaking. The main room was bathed in moonlight filtered through dirty windows. The sealed door stood innocent and silent in the far wall. The scratching had stopped. He approached slowly, placing his ear against the wood. Nothing. But as he pulled away, he noticed something that made his stomach clench with terror. The symbols from the journal were there, carved fresh into the wood around the door frame. Complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they were designed to be seen by something other than human eyes. And they were glowing, faintly like phosphorescent algae, but definitely glowing. David stumbled backward, his rational mind rejecting what he was seeing. Hallucination, stress, too much coffee, and not enough sleep. But even as he tried to rationalize it away, the symbols pulsed brighter. The scratching resumed, more urgent now. Not just SOS, but a full message. Help, trapped, so many of us. David grabbed his keys and jacket. He would drive back to town, find a hotel, forget about the cabin and the journal and the impossible door. But when he reached for the front door handle, it wouldn't turn. The door was locked from the outside. He ran to the windows, but they were painted shut, the glass too thick to break easily. The scratching behind the sealed door grew louder, joined by other sounds, whispers in languages he didn't recognize, the wet sound of something moving in confined spaces. David pressed his back against the front door, hyperventilating. The journal lay open on the kitchen table where he'd left it, pages fluttering, though there was no wind. New words were appearing on the blank pages, written in his own handwriting. Day 1. Finally found the perfect place to write. No, David whispered. No, no, no. But the words kept appearing, copying his own experience exactly. He was becoming part of the journal's story, just like the previous writer. The cabin was documenting each victim, preserving their final days for the next person to find. The sealed door began to bulge outward, as if something enormous was pressing against it from the other side. The symbols blazed brighter, spreading across the walls like a living infection. And through it all, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were calling his name now. David, David, David. But the voices weren't just coming from behind the door anymore. They were coming from outside the cabin, from the forest, from everywhere. The scratching stopped abruptly, leaving only the whispers. David looked at the sealed door and saw that the wood was beginning to split along the old nail lines. Whatever was behind there had been getting stronger, feeding on his fear. In the sudden silence, David heard something that chilled him more than the supernatural manifestations. The sound of a car engine approaching through the forest. Headlights swept across the windows. Someone else was coming to the cabin. The journal's pages continued to fill with his story, written in his own hand. But now new words appeared below his account. Day 1. The woman arrived just after midnight. She said her sister had told her to come. Said her sister had called her on the phone, even though her sister died in a car accident 6 months ago. David ran to the window and saw a woman getting out of a sedan, talking on her cell phone. She looked up at the cabin with an expression of recognition and dread. The door behind him creaked open. Not the sealed door. That remained stubbornly closed. The front door, which had been locked moments before, now swung wide to welcome the new arrival. David tried to call out a warning, but his voice was gone. The shadows in the cabin were moving now, reaching toward the woman outside with fingers made of darkness. The journal's pages rustled, already beginning the next chapter of the story. The woman's story. And David realized with growing horror that he was no longer the protagonist. He was becoming part of the door's collection. The whispers grew louder, welcoming their newest visitor. And in those voices, David could hear the echo of everyone who had come before. All the previous owners and renters and visitors who had discovered the cabin's secret. They were all still here. All still trapped. All still whispering. The calls. Jessica Matthews jerked awake, heart hammering against her ribs. The digital clock's red glow seemed angry in the darkness. She fumbled for her phone, expecting to see unknown number or maybe a drunk dial from one of her college friends. Instead, she saw a name that made her blood freeze. Lisa, home. Her sister had been dead for 6 months. Jessica's thumb hovered over the decline button, but something made her answer. Maybe it was the desperate hope that this was all a mistake, that Lisa was somehow still alive. Maybe it was simple curiosity, or maybe it was something else entirely, a compulsion she couldn't name. Hello voice cracked. Static filled the line, punctuated by what sounded like breathing. Then, impossibly, Lisa's voice came through the speaker. Jess? Oh God, Jess, can you hear me? The phone slipped from Jessica's numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. Lisa's voice continued, tinny and distant through the speaker. I don't have much time. You have to listen to me. You have to stay away from the cabin. Jessica snatched up the phone. Lisa? Lisa, is that really you? Where are you? Everyone thinks you're dead. I know. I felt it happen. The car, the tree, the water filling my lungs. But I'm not gone, Jess. None of us are really gone. We're just somewhere else. This connection won't last long. They don't like us talking to the living. But you're in danger. I can see the threads connecting you to it. The cabin in the mountains. You have to promise me you won't go there. What cabin? Lisa, you're scaring me. The one with the door that shouldn't be opened. The one where they keep us. Promise me, Jess. Promise me you'll stay away. The line went dead. Jessica sat in her bed, staring at the phone. Her rational mind immediately began working to explain what had just happened. Grief hallucination. A cruel prank by someone who had gotten hold of Lisa's old phone. A nightmare so vivid she'd confused it with reality. But Lisa's number had been disconnected months ago. Jessica had tried calling it dozens of times in the weeks following the funeral, desperate to hear her sister's voicemail greeting one more time. The number didn't exist anymore. She scrolled through her recent calls. There it was. Lisa home at 2:47 a.m. Duration 4 minutes, 23 seconds. Jessica screenshotted the call log, her hands shaking. The next morning brought the familiar routine of denying what had happened. Jessica went to work, answered emails, attended meetings. She was a data analyst for a marketing firm, a job that required logical thinking and evidence-based conclusions. Supernatural phone calls from dead sisters didn't fit into her worldview. But as the day wore on, details from the call kept surfacing. Lisa had mentioned a cabin in the mountains. Jessica didn't know of any cabin connected to her sister. Lisa had lived in the city her entire adult life, worked at a downtown law firm, barely even went camping. During her lunch break, Jessica found herself searching online for any connection between Lisa and mountain cabins. Social media, old emails, credit card statements she'd helped settle as part of the estate. Nothing. She tried calling the number back. It went straight to a recording. The number you have dialed is not in service. That evening, Jessica sat in Lisa's old apartment. The lease ran through the end of the month, and Jessica hadn't had the heart to clear it out yet. She was boxing up books when she found Lisa's old day planner, the kind she'd always preferred over digital calendars. Flipping through the last few entries before Lisa's death, Jessica found something that made her stomach drop. 2 weeks before the accident, Lisa had written, "Research cabin rental, RM property management. Need somewhere quiet to work on the Patterson case." Below that, in Lisa's precise handwriting, "Booked, cabin 47, Pine Ridge Road. 3 days, no phone service. Perfect." But Lisa had never mentioned taking a work retreat. She'd been stressed about the Patterson case, a complex inheritance dispute, but she'd never said anything about going to a cabin. Jessica called Lisa's former assistant the next morning. "Oh, yes," Miranda said. She was very excited about that trip, said she'd found the perfect place to concentrate. But then she canceled at the last minute, said something had come up. That was just a few days before. Miranda's voice trailed off. Did she say why she canceled? It was strange, actually. She seemed frightened. I asked if everything was okay, and she just said she'd had a bad dream about the place, about a door that shouldn't be opened. I thought it was just work stress, you know? She'd been putting in 18-hour days on that case. That night, Jessica researched RM Property Management and found Cabin 47. The listing was sparse, just basic details about amenities and location. But in the photo gallery, one image made her breath catch. It was a wide shot of the cabin's interior, showing a rustic main room with a stone fireplace. And there on the far wall was what looked like a door that had been sealed over with newer wood paneling, just like Lisa had described in the phone call. Jessica was still staring at the photo when her phone rang. 2:47 a.m. exactly. Lisa home. This time Jessica answered immediately. "Lisa? I found it. I found the cabin." Static, then Lisa's voice again, clearer this time. "No, Jess, you have to stay away. It's getting stronger. Every person who learns about it feeds it somehow. Your knowledge of it creates a connection." "I don't understand. What is it? What's behind the door?" "The space between. The place where lost things go. It collects people, Jess. People who are connected to each other, connected to the place. I can see them all here. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds." The static grew louder, but Lisa's voice pushed through. "There's a man here. He just arrived. He was writing in a journal when it took him. And there are others, a whole family from the 1980s, a group of college students, people going back decades. They're all connected somehow, all drawn to the cabin by threads they couldn't see. How do I help you? How do I get you out?" "You can't, but you can break the pattern. You can keep it from spreading. Don't go to the cabin, Jess. Don't let anyone else go. And whatever you do, don't open the door." "What door? The one in the cabin?" "No, the one it's going to offer you. It will try to make a deal. It will promise to let me go if you take my place. Don't listen. That's how it spreads. That's how it gets stronger." The connection began to fade, Lisa's voice becoming distant and distorted. "I have to go. They've noticed me talking to you." "But Jess, it's not just about the cabin anymore. It's about the network, the pattern of connections. Break the pattern. Save the others." Line goes dead. Jessica stared at her phone, Lisa's words echoing in her mind. Break the pattern. Save the others. What others? As if in answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know you've been getting the calls too. We need to talk. Others are involved. Meet me at Denny's on 5th Street tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Jessica's hands trembled as she typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "My neighbor disappeared 3 weeks ago. Left behind some things you need to see. Things about the cabin." Jessica spent the rest of the night researching everything she could find about the cabin, about RM Property Management, about unexplained disappearances in the mountain area. The deeper she dug, the more disturbing the pattern became. RM Property Management had been renting the same cabin for over 30 years. Guest reviews were either glowing, perfect solitude, or mysteriously absent. Several renters had left belongings behind and never returned to claim them. Local police reports mentioned multiple missing persons cases connected to the Pine Ridge Road area, but they were always classified as voluntary disappearances, people running away from debts, relationships, or other problems. But Jessica could see the real pattern now. The missing people weren't random. They were connected to each other through invisible threads. Family members, friends, colleagues, neighbors. The cabin wasn't just collecting individuals, it was collecting networks of people. And somehow, through Lisa's death and her connection to the cabin she'd never actually visited, Jessica had become part of that network. Her phone buzzed again. Not a call this time, but a notification from the screenshot she'd taken of Lisa's call the night before. The image had changed. Where it once showed Lisa home at 2:47 a.m., it now showed something else entirely. Unknown the door, at a time that made no sense, 13:73 p.m. Jessica deleted the screenshot, but it reappeared immediately. She deleted it again. It came back. The phone rang. Not Lisa this time. A man's voice, terrified and desperate. They took my journal. They took my story and made it part of theirs. You have to warn the others. The woman who's meeting you tomorrow, she's already been chosen. They're all already chosen. Who is this? David. I was writing a novel. I thought I was safe because I didn't know anyone connected to the place. But knowledge is connection. Once you know about it, you're part of it. The line filled with static, but David's voice pushed through. The journal keeps growing. New stories, new people. Your sister's story is in it now. Your story is starting. But there are others. A man whose neighbor vanished. A woman who inherited a photograph. They're all being drawn in. How do I stop it? You can't stop it, but you can change the ending. The door wants to open all the way. It's been feeding on individuals for decades, growing stronger. But if all the connected people come together willingly, if they choose to enter the door together, it will burn out. The pattern will break. Jessica felt a chill of understanding. You're asking me to die. I'm asking you to choose. Save yourselves, or save everyone who comes after. Because it's spreading, Jessica. The network is growing. Soon it won't need the cabin anymore. It will be able to reach anyone, anywhere. The call ended, leaving Jessica alone with a choice that felt impossible. But as she sat in Lisa's apartment, surrounded by her sister's belongings, Jessica realized the choice had already been made. The moment she'd answered that first call, she'd become part of the story. The only question now was how it would end. Her phone buzzed with one final message from the unknown number. Denny's, noon. Don't bring anyone else. And Jessica, your sister says she's proud of you. Jessica looked at the message, then at the timestamp. It had been sent at 2:47 a.m., but her phone showed it arriving now at 6:23 a.m. Time was starting to break down around her, just like it had for David in his cabin, just like it had for Lisa in the moments before her death. The pattern was tightening, and Jessica could feel herself being pulled toward its center. The vanishing. Marcus Rivera had lived next to Tom Henley for 8 years. They'd shared the kind of neighborly relationship common in quiet suburban developments. Friendly waves across the driveway, casual conversations about property values and weekend plans, the occasional borrowed tool or cup of sugar. So when Tom's newspaper started piling up on his front step, Marcus noticed. The first day, Marcus figured Tom was sleeping in or had left early for work. By the third day, he was concerned enough to ring the doorbell. No answer. Tom's car was still in the driveway, a spotless Honda Civic that Tom washed every Sunday morning without fail. On the fifth day, Marcus called the police. "We'll do a wellness check," Officer Martinez promised. Sometimes people just go away for a while without thinking to stop their mail. But Marcus knew Tom better than that. Tom was meticulous about details. He once spent 20 minutes explaining to Marcus the importance of proper lawn edging. He wasn't the type to leave town without arranging for mail hold and newspaper cancellation. The police found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. Tom's passport was still in his bedroom drawer. His wallet and keys were missing, suggesting he'd left voluntarily. His cell phone was turned off or dead. Looks like he just decided to take a break from life, Officer Martinez concluded. Happens more than you think. Guy gets stressed, needs some space, goes off grid for a while. He'll probably be back in a few weeks. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. Something about Tom's disappearance felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. A week later, Tom's landlord asked Marcus to help with a walkthrough of the house. Tom rented the place from a property management company, and they needed to document the condition of the residence for insurance purposes. Just in case he doesn't come back, the landlord explained awkwardly. Inside, Tom's house looked exactly as Marcus would have expected. Neat, organized, everything in its place. The bed was made with military precision. Dishes were washed and put away. The only sign of disruption was in Tom's home office. Papers were scattered across the desk as if Tom had been searching for something specific. File folders lay open, their contents spilled across the floor. And on the computer monitor, still glowing despite being left on for over a week, was a satellite map of a mountainous region Marcus didn't recognize. The screen showed a detailed view of what appeared to be a remote forest area with a single marker pen dropped in the middle of nowhere. When Marcus clicked on the pen, a pop-up appeared. Cabin 47, RM Property Management. "Did Tom mention anything about going to the mountains?" Marcus asked the landlord. "Not to me, but then we weren't exactly close. He paid his rent on time and kept the place clean. That's all I cared about." Marcus made note of the property management company name and continued looking around. In Tom's bedroom, he found something that made his skin crawl with inexplicable dread. On the nightstand, partially hidden under a stack of books, was a photograph. It was old, the kind with that slightly yellow tint of photos from the 1970s or 80s. It showed a group of people standing in front of a rustic log cabin. There were maybe 8 or 9 individuals, all smiling at the camera, all dressed in the casual outdoor clothing of a bygone era. But what made Marcus's breath catch was what lurked in the background of the photo, barely visible in the shadows between the trees behind the cabin. A dark figure that didn't quite look human, too tall, too thin, with what might have been arms stretched out toward the group. Marcus turned the photo over. In faded ink, someone had written, "Pine Ridge Retreat, 1987, before we knew what was waiting?" Below that, in different handwriting that looked more recent, "They're all gone now. Every single one. Don't let it happen again. TH." Tom's initials. Marcus pocketed the photograph and continued searching. In Tom's desk, he found a folder labeled Research that contained printouts of newspaper articles, missing person reports, and forum posts about unexplained disappearances. All of them were connected to the same general mountain region where Cabin 47 was located. The articles dated back decades. A family of 4 who vanished during a camping trip in 1989. A group of college students who rented a cabin for spring break in 1994 and were never seen again. A nature photographer who went missing while shooting in the area in 2003. Tom had highlighted certain details in each case, how the missing people were always found to have connections to each other beyond their immediate travel groups. The 1989 family had been recommended the camping spot by a coworker whose brother had disappeared in the same area 5 years earlier. The college students had chosen their cabin based on a suggestion from one student's girlfriend whose ex-boyfriend had mentioned the location before he himself vanished. It was like a virus spreading through social networks, drawing people to the same remote location where they simply ceased to exist. At the bottom of the folder, Marcus found Tom's own notes, written in his careful engineer's handwriting. The pattern is clear. The disappearances aren't random. Something at that location is actively recruiting victims through personal connections. Each disappearance creates more connections, draws in more people. Sarah mentioned the cabin during our coffee date 3 weeks ago. Said her sister had been there just before she died in that car accident. Sarah seemed upset about it, like there was something more to the story. I've been having dreams about the place. Dreams where I'm standing in front of a door that's been sealed shut, and I can hear voices behind it calling my name. Sarah's voice is one of them. I have to go. Not because I want to, but because I can feel it pulling at me. The connection is already made. Fighting it only makes it stronger. If something happens to me, if I don't come back, show this research to someone. Break the chain. Don't let it spread any further. Marcus sat back in Tom's desk chair, the photograph clutched in his trembling hands. According to these notes, Tom had disappeared not because he decided to take a break from life, but because he'd been systematically drawn to a location that had been collecting people for decades, and now Marcus was holding the research. Now Marcus knew about the cabin. His phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Marcus, this is Jessica Matthews. I got your number from Tom's phone. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Tom's phone? How did you get Tom's phone? I didn't. That's the problem. My sister's been dead for 6 months, but she's been calling me from her old number. Last night, she gave me a message to pass along to you. She said Tom asked her to contact you. That's impossible. I know, but Marcus is see you. I need to show you some things. There are others involved in this. More people connected to the cabin. We're all being drawn into something, and I think Tom figured out how to stop it. Marcus looked at the photograph in his hands, at the shadowy figure lurking behind the smiling group. What kind of something? Something that's been collecting people for decades. Something that spreads through connections between people. Tom wasn't the first, and he won't be the last unless we do something about it. Do something about what? We don't even know where he is. Yes, we do. He's at the cabin. They're all at the cabin. And Marcus? They're not dead. They're just somewhere else. Somewhere between here and there, trapped behind a door that was never meant to be opened. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Tom's notes had mentioned dreams about a sealed door, voices calling from the other side. How do you know all this? Because my sister's been telling me. Because there's a man there who was keeping a journal of everything that happened to him. Because the pattern is getting clearer and we're running out of time. Time for what? To choose. We can let it keep spreading, keep collecting people one by one, or we can end it, all of us together. The people it's already connected. Marcus heard something in Jessica's voice that terrified him, a resignation that suggested she'd already made her choice. How many others are there? I've identified at least 3 so far. You, me, and a woman who inherited a photograph of the same cabin. There might be more. The network spreads wider than we realize. Marcus looked around Tom's office, at the research his neighbor had compiled, at the evidence of a supernatural predator that hunted through human connections. What do? We meet. Tomorrow at noon, Denny's on 5th Street. We share what we know, and we decide how this ends. After Jessica hung up, Marcus continued searching Tom's house with new urgency. If Tom had figured out how to stop whatever was happening at the cabin, there might be more clues hidden in his belongings. In the basement, Marcus found something that made his stomach turn. Tom had converted a corner of the basement into what looked like a makeshift research station. Maps of the mountain region covered the walls, connected by red string like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. But it was the photos that made Marcus understand the true scope of what they were dealing with. Dozens of pictures, all showing the same cabin from different angles and different time periods. Some were recent digital prints, others were aged Polaroids and film photographs going back decades. In each photo, the cabin looked slightly different, sometimes well-maintained, sometimes run down, sometimes barely visible through overgrown vegetation. But in every single photograph, without exception, there was the same shadowy figure lurking in the background, sometimes between the trees, sometimes at the edge of the frame, sometimes reflected in the cabin's windows, always watching, always waiting. And the figure was getting clearer, more defined in the more recent photographs, as if each new victim made it stronger, more present in the physical world. Tom had arranged the photographs chronologically, and Marcus could see the progression. The figure started as barely a shadow in the 1960s photos. By the 1980s, it had a vaguely human shape. In the recent photos, it looked almost solid. At the bottom of the display, Tom had penned a note in his own handwriting. It's almost ready. When it becomes fully corporeal, it won't need the cabin anymore. It will be able to hunt anywhere. Below that, in different ink, the door is the key. It's not keeping something in. It's keeping something from coming all the way through. Every person it takes weakens the barrier. We have to stop feeding it. Marcus took photos of Tom's research with his phone, but when he looked at the screen, he saw something that made his hands shake. In every picture he'd taken, there was now a shadow in the corner that hadn't been there when he took the shot. The same shadow from the cabin photographs. It was already watching him. Marcus fled Tom's house, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. In his rearview mirror, the shadows seemed deeper than they should be. Streetlights flickered as he passed under them. And on his car radio, the static between stations sometimes sounded like whispers calling his name. At home, Marcus tried to research RM Property Management, but every search led to dead ends. The company existed. He could find basic business registration information, but there were no employee names, no physical address beyond a P.O. box, no website beyond a basic cabin rental listing. It was as if the company was designed to be just real enough to facilitate the cabin rentals, but not real enough to be traced or held accountable. That night, Marcus dreamed of Tom standing in front of a cabin, calling his name. In the dream, Tom's eyes were completely black, and when he spoke, his voice came from somewhere far away. You have to come, Marcus. You have to complete the pattern. It's the only way to save the others. Marcus woke at 2:47 a.m., his sheets soaked with sweat. His phone was buzzing with a text from an unknown number. The meeting tomorrow is crucial. Don't tell anyone else where you're going. And Marcus, bring Tom's photograph. The others need to see it. Marcus looked at the message timestamp. Like Jessica's mysterious messages, this one showed an impossible time, 25:61 p.m. The pattern was tightening around him, just as it had around Tom. And tomorrow he would meet the others who were caught in the same web. He only hoped they could find a way to break free before it was too late. But deep down, Marcus suspected that freedom was no longer an option. The only choice now was how many others they could save before the door opened completely. The inheritance. Eleanor Vance had been cleaning out her great-aunt's house for 3 days, and she was beginning to understand why nobody in the family had volunteered for the job. Aunt Millicent had been what people politely called a collector, which was a genteel way of saying she was a hoarder who couldn't throw away a grocery receipt, let alone anything of actual value. The Victorian house was stuffed floor to ceiling with magazines dating back to the 1960s, boxes of Christmas decorations that hadn't seen daylight in decades, and enough ceramic figurines to stock a small gift shop. Eleanor had rented a dumpster that was already half full, and she'd barely made it through the ground floor. But it was in the attic that she found the photograph. It was tucked inside an old leather portfolio, wrapped in tissue paper that crumbled at her touch. The photograph itself was remarkably well preserved, a large format black and white image that must have been professionally taken sometime in the 1950s. The image showed a group of 12 people arranged in 2 rows in front of a rustic log cabin. They were dressed in the outdoor clothing of the era, heavy wool sweaters, sturdy boots, the kind of practical gear people wore when venturing into genuine wilderness. Everyone was smiling, but there was something strained about their expressions, as if they were forcing happiness for the camera. Eleanor recognized her great-aunt immediately, despite the 6 decades that separated this young woman from the elderly recluse she'd known. Millicent stood in the back row, third from the left, her arm around a man Eleanor didn't recognize. But it wasn't the people in the photograph that made Eleanor's breath catch. It was what lurked in the background. Between the dark pine trees behind the cabin, barely visible in the deep shadows, was a figure that didn't belong. It was too tall, too thin, with what might have been arms stretched out toward the group. The more Eleanor stared at it, the more details she could make out. Details that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. Eleanor turned the photograph over. In her great-aunt's careful handwriting, Pine Ridge Retreat, October 1952. The weekend that changed everything. God forgive us for what we found there. Below that, in what looked like much more recent ink, they're all gone now. Every single person in this photo except me. I've spent 60 years trying to forget, but it won't let me. It's been waiting, watching, growing stronger. Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. The connection passes to family. You have to be the one to end it. Eleanor sank into her great-aunt's old rocking chair, the photograph trembling in her hands. She'd barely known Millicent. Their family had always described her as troubled and private, someone who'd chosen to live alone after some unnamed trauma in her youth. Now Eleanor was beginning to understand what that trauma might have been. She spent the rest of the afternoon searching through Millicent's belongings with new purpose. If her great-aunt had spent 60 years carrying some terrible secret about this photograph, there had to be more evidence somewhere in the house. She found it in Millicent's bedroom, hidden in a false bottom drawer of an old wardrobe. A manila folder labeled Pine Ridge, Never Again, in Millicent's handwriting. Inside were newspaper clippings, letters, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline of events. The newspaper clippings told a story Eleanor could hardly believe. Local hiking group missing after mountain retreat, November 1952. Search called off for missing hikers, December 1952. Lone survivor found after 6 weeks in wilderness, January 1953. The lone survivor had been Millicent. According to the articles, she'd been found wandering along a mountain road, suffering from severe hypothermia and memory loss. She claimed to remember nothing about what had happened to her companions. only that they'd been staying at a remote cabin when something went wrong. The search teams never found the other 11 people. They never even found the cabin. But Eleanor could see from Millicent's private notes that her memory had eventually returned, and what she remembered had haunted her for the rest of her life. Millicent's handwritten account was nearly illegible in places, as if she'd been shaking while writing. The door in the back wall of the cabin, we thought it was just a storage room that had been sealed up. But Robert was always curious about things like that. He started working at the boards with a crowbar he found in the shed. The smell that came out when he got the first board loose, like flowers left in water too long, sweet and rotten at the same time. The darkness behind the door wasn't empty. It moved. It breathed. And when we shined our flashlights into it, we could see shapes moving in the distance. Shapes that looked like people but wrong somehow, stretched out, distorted. It spoke to us, not with a voice, but directly into our minds. It knew things about us, private things, shameful things. It used our own secrets against us, promised to keep them safe if we would just step through the door. One by one, they went in. Robert first, then Margaret, then the others. I was the last one left, and I could hear them calling to me from inside that darkness. Their voices sounded hollow, like they were speaking from the bottom of a well. I ran. God help me. I left them there and I ran. I got lost in the forest for weeks, but eventually I found my way to a road. I told everyone I couldn't remember what happened, and eventually I almost believed it myself. But it's not over. It will never be over. Every few years I dream about that place. I see my friends standing in the darkness behind the door, and they're still calling my name. They look exactly the same as they did that day in 1952, but their eyes are wrong. The thing behind the door isn't just collecting people, it's collecting connections. Everyone who knows about it, everyone who's touched by the story becomes part of its web. I've spent 60 years trying to break the connection, but I can feel it getting stronger. I never married. I never had children. I thought if I could end my family line, I could stop it from spreading. But then I remembered Eleanor, my brother's great-granddaughter. Smart, curious Eleanor who always asked too many questions. The connection will pass to her when I die. I can feel it already reaching for her, using our family bond to draw her in. I've tried to destroy the photograph, tried to burn it, but it always comes back. The image is burned into reality now. It can't be destroyed by normal means. Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I tried to protect you, but some things are stronger than human will. You have to find the others. There are others being drawn to the cabin, people connected to different groups that have been taken over the years. Together, you might be able to end it. The door wants to open all the way. It's been feeding on individuals in small groups for decades, but it needs a larger sacrifice to complete its transition into our world. If all the connected people come together willingly, if they choose to enter the door together, it might burn out from the overload, or it might become unstoppable. I wish I could tell you which outcome is more likely, but staying separate, letting it pick you off one by one, definitely won't stop it. At least together, you have a chance. Eleanor set down the pages with shaking hands. Her great-aunt had spent her entire life carrying this burden, had lived as a hermit to try to contain something supernatural that had been spreading through human connections for decades. And now that burden was Eleanor's. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Eleanor hesitated, then answered. Hello? Eleanor Vance? The voice was female, young, frightened. My name is Jessica Matthews. This is going to sound crazy, but I think we need to talk. It's about a cabin in the mountains, about something that's been collecting people. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. How did you get my number? From someone who's been taken by the thing we're dealing with. Someone who's trying to help us stop it before it spreads any further. There are others, Eleanor. A man whose neighbor disappeared, another man who found a journal. We're all connected to the same entity, and it's getting stronger. Eleanor looked at the photograph in her lap, at the shadowy figure lurking behind her great-aunt, and the 11 people who had vanished into darkness 60 years ago. I found a photograph, Eleanor said quietly, from 1952. My great-aunt was the only survivor. That's it. That's the connection. Eleanor, we're meeting tomorrow at noon. Denny's on 5th Street. We need to share what we know and decide what to do. What to do? End it, one way or another, because it's not going to stop with us. Every person who learns about it, every connection it makes it stronger. Soon it won't need the cabin anymore. It will be able to reach anyone, anywhere. After Jessica hung up, Eleanor sat in her great-aunt's rocking chair, surrounded by the detritus of a life lived in fear and isolation, while Millicent had tried to contain the entity by cutting herself off from human connection, but it hadn't worked. The thing had simply waited, growing stronger, until it could reach the next generation. Sound of wind picking up outside, rain getting heavier. That night, Eleanor dreamed of the cabin. She stood in front of it with 11 other people, not the group from 1952, but a new group. She recognized some of them, a man with kind eyes who might have been David, a woman who looked like Jessica, a middle-aged man who could have been Marcus. In the dream, they were all holding hands in a circle around a door that stood open in the cabin's back wall. Beyond the door was not darkness, but a swirling vortex of light and shadow that seemed to contain the forms of everyone who had ever been taken. Her great-aunt Millicent was there, looking exactly as she had in the 1952 photograph. She was reaching out toward Eleanor, her mouth moving as if she were trying to say something important. Eleanor woke at 2:47 a.m. with tears on her cheeks and the taste of pine needles in her mouth. Her phone was buzzing with a message from an unknown number. The photograph will show you the truth when you're ready to see it. Look again at the figure in the background. Look at what it's really doing with its arms. Eleanor stumbled to where she'd left the photograph and examined it under her reading lamp. The shadowy figure between the trees was clearer now, as if it had moved closer to the surface of the image while she slept. And Jessica was right. The figure's arms weren't stretched out toward the group in a threatening gesture. They were stretched out in welcome, beckoning the 12 people to come closer. As if it were inviting them to step through a door, Eleanor set the photograph aside and walked to her window. In the reflection on the glass, she could see herself standing in her great-aunt's house. But behind her reflection, barely visible, was another figure. The same figure from the photograph, and it was still beckoning. Eleanor closed her eyes and counted to 10. When she opened them, the reflection was normal again. But she could still feel something watching her, waiting for her to make a choice. Tomorrow she would meet the others. Tomorrow they would decide how this decades-long nightmare would end. But Eleanor already knew, deep in her heart, that some choices had been made long before she was born. The pattern had been set in motion in 1952, and every generation since had added to its power. Now it was her turn to play her part in the story. She only hoped that when the final chapter was written, it would be an ending and not a beginning, the convergence. The Denny's on 5th Street was half empty at noon on a Tuesday, populated mostly by shift workers, grabbing late breakfast and elderly couples sharing coffee and pie. It was the kind of anonymous public space where 4 strangers could meet to discuss the impossible without drawing attention. Jessica arrived first, choosing a booth in the back corner where they could talk without being overheard. She spread her materials on the table, printouts of her research, photos of Lisa's apartment, the screenshot of the impossible phone call that kept reappearing on her phone no matter how many times she deleted it. Marcus came next, carrying a manila folder that Eleanor recognized even from across the restaurant. They nodded to each other with the grim familiarity of people who had been unwillingly inducted into the same terrible secret. David was last to arrive, and Jessica felt her heart clench when she saw him. He looked exactly as she'd imagined from his voice on those impossible phone calls. Kind eyes, rumpled clothes, the distracted air of someone who spent more time in fictional worlds than the real one. But there was something wrong with his appearance, something that took Jessica a moment to identify. He was slightly translucent, not enough that other people would notice, but definite enough that Jessica could see the pattern of the booth's upholstery through his body. David caught her staring and managed a weak smile. "It's getting worse," he said simply. "The longer I'm away from the cabin, the less solid I become. I think I'm already partially through the door." Eleanor spread her great-aunt's photograph on the table next to Jessica's materials. "We all are," she said quietly. "This has been building for decades, maybe longer." For the next hour, they shared their stories. David described finding the journal, the sealed door, the whispers that had called his name. Jessica recounted the phone calls from her dead sister, the warnings about the cabin, the growing sense that time itself was breaking down around her. Marcus showed them Tom's research, the missing person reports, the photographs that documented the shadow figure growing stronger over the years. Eleanor revealed her great-aunt's confession, the 1952 disappearances, the terrible choice that Millicent had carried for 60 years. As they talked, patterns emerged. The entity, whatever it was, didn't just collect random victims. It built networks of connected people, then systematically drew them to the cabin through supernatural means. Once someone learned about the cabin, they became part of its web of influence. The knowledge itself created the connection. "It's like a virus," Marcus said, studying the timeline they constructed from their combined research. But instead of spreading through physical contact, it spreads through information and relationships. "My sister never actually went to the cabin," Jessica added. "She just researched it, thought about going there. That was enough to create the connection. When she died, that connection transferred to me through our family bond." David leaned forward, his translucent form flickering slightly. "The journal I found documented the same process. Previous visitors to the cabin, all connected to each other through increasingly distant relationships. Each disappearance created new connections, drew in more people." Eleanor touched her great-aunt's photograph gently. "Millicent thought she could break the cycle by isolating herself, cutting off human connections. But the entity just waited. It had all the time in the world." "Because it's not really from our world," Jessica said, understanding flooding through her. "That's what Lisa's been trying to tell me. The door doesn't lead to another room in the cabin. It leads to the space between worlds. The entity is from that in-between place, and it's been using the cabin as an anchor point to feed on our reality." David nodded. "Every person it takes makes it stronger, more able to influence our world. But it needs a critical mass to fully transition from its dimension to ours. That's why it's been building these networks of connected people." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them photos of Tom's basement research room. "Tom figured out the endgame. Look at these notes he made in the final weeks before he disappeared." The photos showed Tom's handwriting on a whiteboard. Phase 1, individual collection, 1950s to 1990s. Phase 2, network building, 2000s present. Phase 3, mass convergence event. Once sufficient connections established, all network members will be simultaneously drawn to cabin for final harvest. Below that, convergence triggers entity's full manifestation in our reality. After that, it won't need the cabin anymore. It will be able to hunt freely, anywhere, anyone. "So we're not just trying to save ourselves," Eleanor said quietly. "We're trying to save everyone who comes after us." Jessica felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. "The question is how?" Tom's notes mentioned something about all the connected people coming together willingly, but would that stop the entity or just give it what it wants? David's form flickered again, becoming more translucent. "I think I know. The journal I found, it's still being written. New entries appear every day, documenting everything that happens to all of us. But there was something else. Instructions, written in different handwriting. Someone from the other side trying to help." He pulled out a notebook and read from it. "The door is a valve, not a wall. It regulates the flow between dimensions. Too much energy passed through at once will overload the system, causing it to seal permanently. But the sacrifice must be willing, must be complete. All connected individuals choosing together to pass through at the same moment." Eleanor felt her stomach clench. "A suicide mission." "Not suicide," Jessica said slowly. "Sacrifice. There's a difference. We'd be choosing to save others at the cost of ourselves." Marcus shook his head. "We don't even know if it would work. We could be walking into a trap, giving the entity exactly what it wants." "But we know what happens if we don't act," Eleanor pointed out. "It keeps growing stronger, keeps collecting people. Eventually it breaks through completely." All four of their phones buzzed at the same time. The same message from the same impossible number. The convergence begins at sunset. Come willingly or be compelled. The choice is yours, but the outcome is inevitable. Jessica checked the timestamp, 13:73 p.m., just like before. Time's up, David said. His voice was beginning to sound distant, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. I can feel it pulling at me, at all of us. Marcus was staring at his phone in horror. The message? It's not just text. There's a location attached. GPS coordinates. Eleanor checked her phone. The same coordinates had appeared on all their screens, along with a map showing a route to the mountains, to Pine Ridge Road, to the cabin. It's not giving us a choice anymore, Jessica realized. The network is complete. We're all connected now, all four of us. It has enough power to compel us to come. As if to prove her point, Jessica felt an almost physical tug in her chest, as if an invisible rope were attached to her heart and someone were pulling her toward the mountains. Looking at the others, she could see they felt it too. David was the first to stand. Then we make the choice ourselves. We go willingly, together, and we end this on our terms. But what if we're wrong? Marcus asked desperately. What if going there just makes it stronger? Eleanor folded her great-aunt's photograph carefully and put it in her purse. Then we'll be wrong together. But if we're right, we'll save countless others from this nightmare. They left the restaurant together, four people bound by supernatural circumstance, heading toward what they all knew was likely their death. But as they walked to Marcus's car, the only one large enough for all of them, Jessica felt something she hadn't experienced since Lisa's death: peace. The weight of choice had been lifted from their shoulders. They were no longer fighting against the inevitable. They were embracing it, transforming it into something purposeful. The drive to the mountains took 3 hours. As they climbed higher into the pine forests, the radio began picking up strange signals, voices speaking in languages none of them recognized, music that sounded like it was being played backward, long stretches of static broken by what might have been screaming. David's translucency was getting worse. By the time they reached the Forest Service road that led to the cabin, he was barely visible. I'm already more there than here, he said, his voice now definitely coming from somewhere else. But I can see them, all the others who've been taken. They're waiting for us. Are they okay? Jessica asked. David was quiet for a long moment. They're not suffering. It's more like they're incomplete, waiting for the story to end so they can rest. Eleanor checked the GPS coordinates on her phone. We're close, maybe half a mile. The forest around them had grown unnaturally quiet. No bird songs, no insect sounds, even the wind had stilled. It was as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. They walked the final distance in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The path was well worn despite the cabin's remote location. Decades of unwilling pilgrims had walked this route before them. When the cabin came into view through the trees, Jessica felt a shock of recognition. It looked exactly as it had in all the photographs, down to the smallest details. But there was something wrong with the perspective, something that made her eyes water when she tried to focus on it directly. The cabin existed in their reality, but it also existed somewhere else. She could see both versions simultaneously, the solid log structure and the ghostly overlay of something far more ancient and alien. David had become completely translucent now, visible only as a faint outline against the trees. The door is already open, he said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It's been waiting for us. Indeed, the sealed door that David had described from his time in the cabin was now standing wide open. Beyond it was not the darkness he had described, but a swirling vortex of light and shadow that seemed to contain infinite depth. And standing in that impossible space, clearly visible now, were all the people who had been taken over the years. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, reaching out toward the four living people with expressions of desperate hope. They're all still here, Eleanor whispered. Every single person who's ever been connected to this place. Jessica could see Lisa among the crowd, looking exactly as she had in life. Her sister was mouthing something, the same words over and over. Together. It has to be together. The entity made itself known then, not as a visible presence, but as a feeling of vast intelligence and hunger that pressed against their minds. It didn't speak in words, but they all understood its message. You have come willingly. Good. Your sacrifice will allow me to fully enter your world. All the networks I have built, all the connections I have forged, will become conduits for my influence. Every person who has ever heard of this place, who has ever spoken of the missing, will become part of my hunting ground. No, Jessica said aloud, that's not why we came. You misunderstand your purpose. You are not here to stop me. You are here to complete me. But Eleanor stepped forward, her great-aunt's photograph clutched in her hand. Millicent spent 60 years figuring out how to stop you. She left instructions. The old woman's knowledge was incomplete. She fled before understanding the true nature of the door. But we're not fleeing, Marcus said, moving to stand beside Eleanor. We're here willingly, all of us, connected to each other and to everyone you've taken. We're here to overload your system. Jessica joined them, then David's fading form completed their circle. Together, Jessica said, echoing Lisa's words. All at once. Every connection you've built, every network you've created, flowing through the door simultaneously. The entity's presence suddenly felt less confident, almost worried. You do not understand what you are attempting. The energy release could destroy you all permanently, not trapped between worlds, but obliterated entirely. We understand, Eleanor said quietly, but it will also destroy you, and everyone else will be free. The figures in the vortex, all the people who had been taken over the decades, were nodding, their faces filled with desperate hope. Lisa was crying, but she was smiling too. They joined hands, the four of them, forming a human chain that connected all the networks the entity had built. Jessica could feel the weight of every person who had ever been touched by the cabin's influence flowing through her. Hundreds of lives, maybe thousands, all connected by threads of family and friendship and coincidence. The entity's presence was growing frantic now, trying to separate them, but it was too late. The convergence it had spent decades orchestrating was happening, but not in the way it had intended. Now, David said, his voice barely audible, before it can stop us. Together, they stepped toward the open door. The moment their joined hands crossed the threshold, Jessica felt every connection the entity had forged blazing to life simultaneously. The energy was overwhelming, not just the four of them, but everyone they represented, everyone who had ever been part of the networks, flowing through the door at once. The entity screamed, a sound that existed in dimensions beyond human hearing. The cabin began to shake, reality itself rippling around the overloaded doorway. In the swirling vortex, Jessica saw Lisa one last time. Her sister was smiling, at peace finally, as she and all the other trapped souls began to fade into light. "Thank you," Lisa whispered across impossible distances. "Thank you for setting us free." The door began to collapse in on itself, the vortex imploding as the energy overload sealed the breach between worlds. Jessica felt herself being pulled apart and put back together, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously for one impossible moment. Then there was light, pure, cleansing light that burned away the darkness between worlds, and silence. The cabin was found 3 days later by a Forest Service patrol, responding to reports of seismic activity in the area. The structure had collapsed completely, leaving only a foundation and scattered logs that showed signs of having been struck by lightning. 4 abandoned cars were discovered along the Forest Service road. The owners were never found, despite extensive searches. The missing persons cases remain open, filed alongside dozens of others connected to the same remote location over the past 70 years. But the disappearances stopped after that day. The reports of missing hikers, the vanished campers, the people who went to the mountains seeking solitude and were never seen again, all of it ended on the day the cabin collapsed. The journal that David Martinez had been keeping was never found among his belongings. But sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, people in the nearby towns report finding new notebooks on their doorsteps. Notebooks filled with stories of 4 brave people who chose sacrifice over survival, who broke a cycle of supernatural predation that had lasted for decades. If you've listened this far, you know the truth now. You're connected to their story, part of the network of knowledge they died to protect. But their sacrifice worked. The door is sealed. The entity is gone. The cabin doesn't exist anymore. You can search every database, every property listing, every satellite map. You won't find RM Property Management or Cabin 47 or Pine Ridge Road. But sometimes, late at night, people report getting phone calls from numbers that don't exist. Voices of the missing, calling to thank them for listening, for remembering their story, for keeping their sacrifice alive. If you ever get such a call, remember this: Jessica, David, Marcus, and Eleanor didn't die. They chose to become the final guardians, the last line of defense between our world and the hungry darkness that waits in the spaces between. They're still out there, still protecting us, and they're still watching.